My name's Daryl Johnston with Highway Walkers Media, and we're here at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., because we're doing a special documentary about the Lincoln Highway. More specifically, about the kooky characters who walked across the Lincoln Highway in 1915 to get from New York City to the World's Fair in San Francisco. Even though the Lincoln Highway, which was founded in 1913, runs from Times Square in New York City to San Francisco, California, Washington, D.C. is the most logical place to start. Patriotism and national pride have more to do with this story than geography. The 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition ushered in the new century and put modern marvels on display. It was also the culmination of bad luck, ingenious engineering, and a strong sense of duty. The 1906 earthquake leveled almost 80% of San Francisco. City leaders realized that a global exposition would help incentivize rebuilding and give the community a tangible goal for recovery. Like a phoenix from the ashes, San Francisco was rebuilt in just 9 years. The effort required to rebuild the city was emulated after the incredible feat of completing the Panama Canal in 1914. San Francisco saw the earthquake of 1906 and the completion of the Panama Canal as an opportunity to reestablish itself as a trading hub in the Pacific, specifically with Europe and Asia. Rather than sailing around Cape Horn or traveling overland via the Isthmus of Panama to get to San Francisco, the Panama Canal made this journey much simpler. The Lincoln Highway shares many of these attributes with the Panama Pacific Exposition. Born of hard work, a strong sense of duty, and patriotism, the highway's namesake in Washington, D.C. is really where this story began.
By 1915, hundreds of people had aspired to walk across the United States, and many of them had succeeded. Their reasons varied, but one of the most frequently given was to win an alleged money prize. The many well-publicized earlier attempts at walking across the country would certainly have been a stimulant to the Panama Pacific Expo walkers of 1915, and we can see today that their walking was part of an already well-established practice. You might even say a tradition.
But from here on out, we discuss the individuals that the Lincoln Highway inspired and why they felt drawn to San Francisco at the Panama Pacific Exposition in 1915. These are the stories of the men and women who traveled from ocean to ocean on the Lincoln Highway in 1915. We spoke to expert, author, and historian Lyle Henry, who has written numerous books and articles about historic highways, including the Lincoln Highway. And he's currently putting together a writing project about this little-known history about the Lincoln Highway walkers who walked to San Francisco to get to the World's Fair in 1915.
Yeah, he was 20 years old, and he was walking from New York to San Francisco, chained to his bicycle. He had the chain that went through the frame of the bike and then it came around and locked it to his wrist. So he believed that if he got to San Francisco, he would win a prize of $1,000 for having the most novel way to get to the fair. Okay. The people at the fair were dealing daily with people like this who were claiming there was no prize, there was no contest. But somehow the word got out, and so you had all these loonies who were proposing ways to go. Anyway, this was this guy's way. He was going to do a chain to his bicycle.
A big part of garnering attention while walking across the country in 1915 was having a good story to go along with it. The man with the bicycle claimed to have been captured by the Mexican army and held as a prisoner and wounded in battle.
None of that could possibly be true. He was only 20 years old. He claimed that everything was going well until he got to Grand Island, Nebraska. He was obviously on the Lincoln Highway, and an automobile crashed into him, and it broke his shoulder and did some internal damage. For 6 weeks, he was in a hospital. So he took the wheels off the bike, and he lay in bed with his bike for 6 weeks. Anyway, he didn't get to San Francisco in time to collect his non-existent prize of $1,000. The press would just report all this. No one ever said, "Oh, what a bunch of baloney this is." The most outrageous walker on the Lincoln Highway. Okay? Clearly was a guy named Wilbert from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who set out to come to the Panama Pacific Exposition on stilts, walking all the way, accompanied by his wife and children, who preceded him daily by train. He never got past, I think it was Cheyenne, when he was arrested and sent back to Pennsylvania for some sort of petty larceny. Actually got to Wyoming on stilts. Again, there's the same thing. He was competing for a prize, $5,000 prize. He thought if he got to San Francisco, he'd get that prize. He kept sending his progress reports in. They kept telling him there's no prize. His height when he was on the stilts was 10 foot 8 inches. Now, I think he was well received. I think people were really impressed by him. When they saw him coming down the street, how could you not be impressed? Who was this magnanimous billionaire who was offering all these prizes of thousands of dollars to people if they could complete the route? Who was it? They'd like to find him. There was only one person who, at least in that year, in 1915, the only one person that did it walking backwards. There have been other people who did it walking backwards, or at least they did long-distance walking. I don't know whether they used the Lincoln Highway.
The man made it from the Panama Expo after walking backwards all the way from San Francisco to New York City, earning himself $5,000 from a bet. The people who put him up to it were Alaskan gold prospectors who made a wager between them for $20,000 as to whether or not he would make it.
The other guy with him was walking, but he was walking in conventional manner. He was the minder. He was there to make sure that there was no cheating. He got paid $4 a day for his work. One of the most amazing things to me is how easy it apparently was financially to cross the country this way. They were selling postcards. And all kinds of people were selling postcards, for 5 cents or 10 cents. I would think you'd have to sell an awful lot of postcards to make enough money to cross the country. They must have sold them too, because I have 3 cards for the guy on stilts, and they show up on eBay all the time. You can actually find. You think they would be among the rarest, but they aren't. He must have sold an awful lot of them. I think some of the other animal-drawn ones, though, were good. Like this woman who did it with a dog team. There were people doing it with a wolf team.
Estelle Mason was a self-proclaiming dog sled driver who claimed to have been hired by Alaskan dog breeders to test the capabilities of a particular breed of dog. While doing a dog sled demonstration in Omaha, Nebraska, she announced that she was circumnavigating the globe and needed to get to the Panama Pacific Expo so as to collect her big sum of money. She also claimed to consult Ernest Shackleton before his Antarctic adventure.
It was just all baloney. Whether she got there, I don't know. Whether she got there on time, I don't know. She finally later changed the due date to something like December 20, the last day of the Panama Pacific Exposition. I don't know whether she made that deadline. All I could find was one more news account in 1916 saying that she was being pulled by her dog team, thrown with a sled, and broke a leg. That was the last of her. I mean, the roads, as they were being developed for automobile use, and they were pretty bad prior to World War One. After World War One, though, I mean, there was an intensified concern to get those roads into proper use by automobiles. I think it became harder to have this kind of operation out there. I mean, how can you have a dog team or someone walking backwards on a busy highway? What happened is you found after World War One a fall off in this kind of thing we've been talking about, but a rise in motorized movements, people crossing in unusual vehicles.
In 1919, despite road conditions being so poor, then Lieutenant Colonel Dwight Eisenhower participated in the first coast-to-coast Army convoy. The purpose of this journey of nearly 300 men was to determine whether it was possible for a motorized military expedition to cross the continent. Eisenhower clearly remembered this experience when he created the interstate highway system as president.
But this notion of promoting causes by moving across the country became very prominent after World War One. It continues up to the present day. Whenever you hear today about someone crossing the country, whether it's just walking or by some unusual means, it's usually to promote some cause, world peace or whatever. And there still are such people who do it. I think it takes some doing today, though. You're certainly not going to use the interstate highways. They were told over and over again, there is no prize. So it may just have been malarkey by them to make that claim. It sounds good. It even provides a rationalization. For why else would you be walking backwards or on stilts? The fair received hundreds of proposals, and they had some really good ones. Like one guy proposed to come in locked in an iron ball that would roll. Somehow, I don't know how he was going to get it to move. Another one was purported to come in with a mule team of 150 mules, and each mule would be carrying an advertisement for a different national product. Can you imagine? That would be a good one coming down the street. Another one was going to have an ostrich team pulling them in. The committee had to send out letters to all these people saying there is no prize.
Name that you're toying with right now is Freaks, Cranks, and Lunatics?
Yeah, that's what they were called in the press. They were actually identified that way. Freaks, What was the second term? Freaks?
Cranks.
Cranks.
And
Crank is at least a little less pejorative, but, they call someone a freak. Why anyone would want to even consider pushing a miniature car across the country, I don't know. But there were 3 or 4 efforts using pushmobiles. You had a guy named DeLyon who teamed up with a guy named Schmidt. They were going to push their way to San Francisco. DeLyon stayed with it to the bitter end. He had 10 different partners on the way. That's why
he pushed the whole time.
Yeah, and all these have different partners here. The trouble with a pushmobile is you can't do it alone. You need at least 2 people, one to guide and steer, and one to push, and then they take turns. And they were stuck in so many places, and they had to keep changing the route. And they added hundreds of miles and many years onto the trip schedule. So when he finally got to San Francisco, he was being pushed by a donkey. His 10th partner pulled out somewhere in San Diego.
So I'm curious about some of these reasons that you've got here. And one of the reasons he said, so to advertise or sell products, I understand that.
Yes.
But to restore health? Some people did
Yeah,
these travels.
many claimed that. Now, keep in mind, it's a claim only,
Okay.
and it may be based on self-diagnosis. I think it probably was. One of the characters that used the Lincoln Highway called himself the Lincoln Highway Kid.
The Lincoln Highway Kid claimed that he had tuberculosis and would walk himself to health on the Lincoln Highway en route to the Panama Exposition. He met a partner with heart trouble along the way, and he joined the Lincoln Highway Kid on his walk to San Francisco.
I suppose, it gave a justification for doing it. People can say, well, that's admirable. Instead of saying, you're just shirking work, why don't you go back and do something useful? Which is what they were inclined to say about most of these characters. But you wouldn't say that about someone who's genuinely sick.
Charlotte Palmer, a woman from Boone, Iowa, was engaged to a man in Seattle. She thought herself to be overweight and had 2 sick boys living with her, and she couldn't afford to travel to San Diego to be married.
She got the idea of walking to San Francisco. That would take care of her weight problem, her son's health problem, and the financial problem. She got in touch with some businesses in Omaha and proposed to advertise those businesses along the way as they walked. She got $2,750. Think about that. That's an immense amount of money.
She promised to advertise the businesses along the way that sponsored her walk. What that meant was that she painted a business's name on every rock, cliff, and building she could.
Finally, they had to go up to get married, okay? And so they took a ship up to Seattle. And when they got to Seattle, they found that the judge wouldn't let the wedding proceed because there was no one living in Seattle who could certify that the bride and groom were old enough to be married. They were both in their 40s. That's one thing I do find over and over in the newspaper accounts. When these guys hit town and the press takes notice of them, there's almost always a discussion of hundreds of people who are there. It was easy to gather a crowd when you had some of these characters come in. At the very same time, you might view them skeptically. Their claims might seem ludicrous, Anyway, you heard it last week from someone else making the same claim, And who are these people, the freeloaders and loafers who are walking across the country? So I can see easily how people would be drawn to them, take notice of them, buy their postcards, even. And still view them somewhat skeptically.
It seems like, just from what you've said, a lot of this is connected to the fair. Was some of this also connected to promoting the Lincoln Highway itself, or did those two crazes not quite mash up?
I don't think there was any particular effort by the Lincoln Highway people to encourage this kind of thing. They wanted cars to use it for obvious reasons. But I'm not aware that they were trying to get these goofy characters out on the highway. I can see why they might very well not want them. I mean, you want people to take the highway seriously as an automobile road, right? So I think the 1915 fair was important as a stimulus. I mean, why would there have been so much then? That was an unusual period in American history. That's often been commented on by historians. There's something about those first couple of decades of the 20th century in America that kind of sets them apart. There was a really strong feeling of optimism, a feeling of capacity, able to do things. And as I point out, even holding the fair in San Francisco is evidence of that. I mean, San Francisco was devastated in 1906 by an earthquake and fires. Here they are in 1915 hosting a World Fair. They were back, you see. They had rebuilt the city. And that's the kind of attitude that was prevalent at that time. And the Lincoln Highway, another evidence of that. Americans could do things. And most of all, the Panama Canal. And here we are, the Panama Pacific international exposition to show that America could really do things. That's why I think then you had all these characters out there. This was viewed as a big deal. the fair in San Francisco.